Today on our show, we have journalist Charles Groenhuijsen. Welcome to Doing Life.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, and Charles, you have been a US correspondent and an international reporter for many, many years. And even by Dutch TV viewers, you've been selected and chosen as the best foreign correspondent. And I was raised by you. You were the voice of America for me. And I'm very, very honored to have you on our show.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it's important these days where there's an overload of information and media to have voices that are keep truth and integrity high, which is hard in a world where so many things happen and definitions are not always as clear. So we would like to ask you some questions. And
sure.
You're very experienced, both in corporate worlds and in the media world. And what today do you see as a main worry among your clients, basically? Because they ask you for your opinion. They know that your great objective view can help them. So what is it what you can bring to the client?
What I try to bring when I, sometimes I do it on TV as well, but, primarily when I do speaking engagements and do interviews, I try to bring people the message of hope. And it sounds like, oh my gosh, a message of hope, please get a grip. What I try to do is bring people a message of hope based on cool, hard facts. And that's very interesting in these days, of course, because, facts are no longer, as precious for a lot of people as they should be. With fake news and everything, we know all that stuff. I'm not going there. But I try to do it based on facts and on other people's opinions. Let me give you one example. I wrote a book a couple of years ago. It was in Dutch, but the English translation would be Optimists Rule the World. And I did a theater tour here in Holland. And I did performances all over the country. And during my performance, I asked my audience, the last 100 years, pick one or two leaders that are truly inspirational for you, that really made a difference in their way of thinking. And Margaret, every single time I got the same names. For example, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela said, if you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Martin Luther King, love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. These were people, and John Kennedy was mentioned, Angela Merkel was mentioned, Franklin Roosevelt, Churchill, those kinds of people. And every single one of them has a similar philosophy. Be an optimist, try to work with the people you're working against. In case of Roosevelt and Churchill, it was with Hitler, and it didn't work with Hitler, of course. It did work with allies. It was always, stick out your hand and work with people. Churchill used to say, a pessimist sees a difficulty in every opportunity, an optimist sees an opportunity in every difficulty. And that's the basis of the philosophy. Every single time I said to my audience, think about it. If the first names that pop up in your head are people who say we have to work together, not you're a bad person, you're fake news, you don't belong here, we should kick you out of the country. No, people who worked with other people, and Mandela is maybe the best one, right? Was imprisoned for I don't know how many years, and said to his white suppressors, let's work together. And together with his white oppressor, President de Klerk, he got the Nobel Peace Prize. That's a great example.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing this message and doing this work, because there's a lot of aggressivity in wording. It's exactly what you were stipulating, this judgment, this harsh polarization that's cutting through society at speed light almost. So we're like, how can we stop this? What can we do? Also, just as a single reader with a newspaper or a message online, what can we do when we observe it? Because we feel that it's off somehow.
What I would recommend to people my age, but particularly also to young people, if you read stuff, the first thing, maybe not you should, but you could do, is ask yourself, what the heck am I reading here? What's the source here? That's the first thing you have to be aware of. What's the source? Is it a legitimate, serious newspaper, TV station? Is it a serious website? That's the first thing you should do, I think, in order to determine whether something could be right or could be wrong. Mm-hmm. But the second thing you could do is ask yourself, this is what I'm reading, but what's maybe the broader picture? Take a few steps back. When you read about crime, when you read about violence, when you read about war, when you read about the climate issue, all these subjects are worrisome in a lot of ways. Yes. And secondly, Margaret, they are always news. I've been in the news business for really almost 50 years. I started in 1974. And in my business, the basic rule is good news is no news. And that's a dramatic mistake. Yes. Why is it a dramatic mistake? First of all, I mean, think about your own life. The people you care about, your family, your friends, your children. How do you behave among these people? You try to encourage them. You try to be nice to them. You try to do nice things together. With looking at the world, we take a totally different approach. We don't look at what's going right in the world. We don't look for encouraging signs. No, we look for the bad news. And that's our fault. It's our mistake as journalists. And I always recommend people, if again, crime, violence, and I talk a lot about silent revolutions. When you look at my perspective of silent revolutions, for example, let's talk about literacy. Yes. Crucial in the development of the world for men and women, for boys and girls. Go, for example, it's one of my all-time favorites in websites, Our World in Data. Go to Our World in Data and punch in the search thing, literacy, whatever you want to type in. And you will see that in all these sectors of life, you see unprecedented, I repeat it, unprecedented progress. If you look at literacy, for example, 100 years ago, about 10% of the people in the world were literate. Now it's 90%. That's bad for the last 10%, but it's unprecedented progress. If you look at life expectancy, if you look at the growth, that's another one, the growth of the middle class worldwide. It's unbelievable. Billions, yes, not millions, billions of people have succeeded in the last, let's say, 30 years to rise from poverty to middle class. Are these people rich? No. Can they do whatever they want? No. But being parents, for example, these parents, moms and dads, can do something, can mean something for their children that they didn't get from their parents. Yeah. From one generation to the other, you see this, again, unprecedented progress. Literacy, life expectancy. Another one of my favorites is the position of LGBT people. Yeah. I remember here in Holland, we have gay marriage for, I don't know, 25 or 30 years. And we were one of the first countries to allow a gay marriage. And I know in a lot of countries, the situation is still bad or really bad. Yes. People are prosecuted, thrown in jail, tortured, everything because they're gay, for example. But look at the progress here. I remember when I grew up, I lived in a small town in the north of Holland. The first time a gay couple came living in our village. Margaret, I'm not going to repeat here how we called these people back then. Yeah. And I grew up in a pretty liberal family. It was awful. Yeah. The progress here, again, I mean, we've come a long way. This is when you talk about sheer civilization, being civilized among each other. Yes, it's unbelievable. And you know, I call it a silent revolution, but in a lot of ways, it's not silent because it's there every day, and that's very encouraging and hopeful.
Yeah, thank you, because that is hopeful. It is indeed. Still, there are many people say, yeah, okay, but all the poor people in the world, and the difference between rich and poor is getting worse. I mean, where are these voices coming from? I mean, who's feeding this? If you say, hey, great journalism is based on facts, data is looking for the hard facts. It's important. So where are these stories coming from that kind of stir, you know?
From us,
Hmm.
from journalism.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it over the years. I mean, 50. I mean, good news is no news.
Yeah.
That's again, that's the biggest rule in journalism. Good news is no news. And in a lot of ways, I mean, of course, I mean, a plane crash is news. All the planes that arrive safely are not news. Of course not.
Yeah.
But that's why I said, when you see things happen, I mean, we talk, at the end of January. I don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine the next couple of weeks. You don't know. I don't know. So we're talking about the threat of potential war in the Ukraine. I don't know what's going to happen. That's very worrisome. But at the same time, again, go to Our World in Data and the more similar sites. But Our World in Data is my all-time favorite.
Yeah.
Type in violence, or for example, battle death, the people killed in wars on the battlefield. If you look at that graph, Margaret, I mean, you don't believe your eyes. The decline in the number of people killed, soldiers killed on the battlefield, is from here to here. It's a huge, huge decline. And again, I mean, there still is violence. There are still wars going on, but less, much less than all the centuries back in the last 2,000 years. I mean, we never lived in a more peaceful era than now.
And so, yeah, that's good to know. But still, we still see here the pain, right? I mean, Afghan, indeed, this threat for Ukraine, and we are now also knowing, which we didn't know in the past, that governments, they're earning money with the war machine, for example. So there's a mistrust towards the journalists, towards media, towards governments, that we want to, we wish it wasn't the case, but it is the case. So how can we just mentally deal with this, emotionally almost, I would say?
Well, again, face the facts. I'm a stubborn guy in the sense that one of the things I've been telling people for years now, a government, on average, not every government and not all the time, is a force for good. I grew up here in Holland. I lived in the United States for 23 years, so I know a little bit about different approaches of the concept of government. But the things I just mentioned, I haven't mentioned education. I mentioned literacy, but let's mention education worldwide. I mean, a tremendous progress. I mean, the difference between 50 years ago and now, for example, for girls let's take the Middle East, right? Yeah. In a lot of ways, very conservative. Some people would say backward, whatever you want to call it. But the progress in, for example, the Middle East, there are universities in the Middle East that decided to have 2 levels of entry exams. You know why?
No, tell me.
Not enough boys pass the exam. So they have 2 levels. They have an easy exam for the boys and a harder one for the girls in order to keep it a little bit even. The girls, Margaret, are doing much better. Yes. One of my favorite articles over the years was in The Economist a couple of years ago. You can look it up. Go to The Economist and type in the weaker sex, right? The weaker sex are women because physically, we men are stronger. But mentally and in school performance, girls are winning the battle.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to repeat myself, but that's unprecedented. That's a silent revolution worldwide. And I'm 67, so I wish I were 30 and I could see for another 40 or 50 years how this thing is gonna play out. The girl power is on the rise. The amount of unused talent, creativity, entrepreneurship, enthusiasm, social attitude that is unused.
Yes.
Because women still are, there's a long way to go. We know. But we've come a long way.
Because I think the way motherhood is dealt with, for example, in the United States, it's a big part of our audience is based in the United States. Mm-hmm. It's very, I would almost say retarded. It makes it almost impossible for women to step up and join this silent revolution, where it, as you say as well, it has a huge potential for the benefit of the country, right? I mean, yes.
But, also in the United States, Margaret, right? I mean, I lived there for 23 years. I know what's going on, and I follow what's going on now politically, and I think it's very worrisome. But at the same time, I did quite a bit of research about African Americans in the United States. We know where they come from, right? I just quoted Martin Luther King. Let's take, the 60s when Martin Luther King was still alive. And now, same thing. Men and women, the level of education has risen dramatically. Are we there yet? No. Again, a long way to go. I mean, there's a lot of, discrimination, inequality. Yes, that's right. But go back to what I mentioned earlier. How do you deal, for example, with your children?
Yeah.
Imagine your child comes home with a report card, right? And let's take the American way of grading with A, B, C, D, E, F, right? A highest and F is fail. Imagine your child comes up to you and says, Dad or Mom, look at my report card. I had a C for math and I have a B now. Great. I had a B for English and now I have an A. That's great. And then the parent looks down on the child and says, well, good news is no news. I see a D for Spanish and you have an E for social sciences or whatever. Then the child goes like, my God. But that's the good news is no news approach. We wouldn't do that with our children, right? You try to encourage them. I say, that's great. From B to an A or from C to a B, that's great, terrific. Keep up the good work, and I'll try to work on the other things. Journalism only mentions the F's and the E's and doesn't mention the A's and the B's because good news is no news. And if you try to imagine what would happen to your and my children, right? Mine are grown up in the late 20s, everything. But imagine raising your children in a very negative way, stressing the negative things, the bad things all the time. Yeah. Then they would grow up to become pretty miserable people. But the way journalists, educate the world, because journalists educate the world. We tell you guys what's going on in the world, like we parents tell our children what's going on in the world. And there's such a huge gap between what we do or should do as parents, encourage kids, and what we do as journalists, stressing the negative things all the time. And again, if a child comes home with an F and an E on the report card, you have to talk to them because an F and an E won't bring them to a good college, for example. But keep in mind, like I mentioned, Martin Luther King, stress the positive things as well.
Yeah. Yes, that's important. And so, I've worked in media field for a long time as well. And I loved working with the independent media that are not tied into direct links with government, a really independent one. How can we, as consumers, media consumers, find these, like what you're saying, Our World in Data? That's a great tip. I hope everybody's writing this down because that's helpful. But how do we...
I'll give you some more web links and you can put it in the notes. Yes. There's so much more out there that you can consult, and if you have to do a paper for school or for college or whatever, and you can use that stuff. There's so much out there. The problem is that the mainstream media, as they're called right now, and I work for mainstream media. I've worked for public broadcasting here in the Netherlands for my whole life. But there's so many sources that you could use and great graphs. I'll give you some stuff and you can put it in the notes.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much. So you're saying, because you like to take the example of parenting. Of course, a lot of parents have a hard time parenting their children with the emotional intelligence, with the spiritual intelligence, because they're so stressed. They don't have this bandwidth, this patience to watch their own words, to correct their children on the words usage. So what do you, how important is our own daily language to actually link this also to better understand the media when it's sensational or manipulative? So,
well, in day-to-day life, one of the things I've learned is more often listen instead of talking. There's in Dutch is an expression, avoid opa, and opa is opinie, problemen en advies. That means opinion, problems, and advice.
Yeah.
And try to, when you talk to people you don't know, for example, you interview people, we tend, as journalists, we try to first, very often, give our own opinion or talk from a certain prejudice, etc., and then ask questions instead of tell me what's great about your job, what's great about your family, what's great about the book you've written, whatever. And in day-to-day life, if you avoid opa, as I mentioned, it's in Dutch, of course, and opa is grandfather in Dutch, as you know. But avoid opa means listen. Yeah. And listen, and then come up with your next question instead of go to your list. Oh, I have another very critical, maybe negative question that I wanted to ask. You know, in my world, a good interview is an interview with a lot of, very, I would almost say suspicious questions. You ask an entrepreneur, you ask a cabinet member, you always ask questions with the underlying premise, you're probably wrong, or you're probably trying to deceive me, or you're probably lying to me, instead of tell me your story and let me tell you. When I ask you, Margaret, tell me about the work you do, what do you like about it, instead of, oh my God, that's that stuff you're doing, I wouldn't. Then you try to do this, right, verbally. You try to defend yourself, you become suspicious to me, instead of the way you ask me questions now is, Charles, tell your story. And I love to tell it. Mm-hmm. And I love to share it with the people. And, if you combine the attitude of let's take a few steps back and try to find the positive part also of world news, how bad it may be. A great example, natural disasters. Natural disasters are always great news. Great in the sense, great for TV. Because great stuff, great pictures. It's not like a government crisis. How do you show a government crisis? A tsunami, a volcano erupting. That's great for TV. Yeah. Look at the numbers, Margaret. The number of people killed by natural disasters has been last 150 years. Okay. Who knows? Yeah, nobody knows. No, nobody knows, but it's true. And there are a lot of reasons for it. One of the reasons is because we get smarter with water, we get smarter with predicting disasters, we get smarter. It's partly, at least, it's our accomplishment worldwide to bring down the number of natural disasters victims. Nobody knows. No. And another thing, in the discussion, I'm not very much a tech guy. I studied history in college, so I'm a kind of guy. I'm not a mathematician. But I like IT, I like technology. And one of the things that strikes me in the whole discussion about Facebook and social media, it's very, very negative. The frightful five, them? Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, the frightful five. Yeah. And I can see why they're called frightful, because, their market position is extremely strong. And, you have to worry about it. You have to think about it. Oh my God, how's this going to end? But at the same time, the flip side of the story, let's take Facebook. The number of people who can communicate about their lives, about their personal choices, about their gender, about their hobbies, about anything worldwide is unbelievable. The amount of communication that's going on among people, sometimes in a very negative way, but very often in a positive way, in a very engaged way, is unbelievable. And the younger generation, they only look at the screens, they don't play outside anymore, they don't go play soccer or jump rope or whatever. That may be true, but at the same time, when I look at the younger generation, Margaret, this is the best informed young generation ever. You remember Aristotle last night? We don't remember. Maybe 2,500 years ago, was already complaining about the young people nowadays. They're worth nothing.
I know. Yeah.
Come on. Of course, there are things to worry about. Yeah. And the naming and shaming on social media. I know. But there's a flip side to the story. I always try to look at, take a few steps back. Is there a flip side? And there is a flip side. I mentioned education. I mentioned literacy, for example, for women in countries where it's not as good as in the United States or here in Western Europe. These women, girls, are informed about all kinds of health issues. but education, in an unprecedented way. I'm sorry to use the word unprecedented, but all the time, because it is happening. These silent revolutions. Our grandparents wouldn't believe their eyes. How literate, how smart, how creative, how entrepreneurial this young generation is. I love the young generation.
Yeah, me too. I think the opportunities are amazing, and it's like you say, the entrepreneurial spirit. It's also, I think, driven because there is a part of the generation that is confused. They don't know whom they can trust or who they can really believe, and they kind of take on their own life, really just busting through, using all the opportunities, and then creating their own life, basically.
Yep.
I mean,
and they do it in a different way compared, at least, to my generation.
Yeah.
It's a two-sided story. We have the story where you see people, being angry, being suspicious. The whole fake news thing in the United States, it's terrible right now. It is awful. It's true. But at the same time, I see the young generation, that's the flip side of this story, who stress really core values of human life.
Yeah.
They say, yes, I work, but I want to have time for my friends. I want to have time for my family, who are very, flexible and inclusive when it comes to gender, when it comes to people of other color, from other backgrounds, etc. Again, that's a huge change with my generation. I remember in the village where I lived, the first non-white people moved in. And we were looking at them and said, oh my gosh, they were from Indonesia. And I mean, that was strange to us. When I look at my children, in a way, they're colorblind. I remember in 2012, re-election of Barack Obama. You remember, right? At the time, there was a discussion in the United States about gay marriage. And people asked me all the time, said, Charles, will the United States have gay marriage one day? I said, I doubt it. I doubt it, for a number of reasons. And at some point, our daughter was 16 at the time, Francine. And I was interested because I wrote about this stuff and I reported on TV about this whole discussion with Barack Obama going for the civil union or gay marriage. There's a whole thing. And I asked Francine, Francine, I'm curious to hear from you, being a 16-year-old, how do you guys talk among each other about the concept of gay marriage, right? Her answer, what's the issue, Dad?
Yeah.
And that's one of these moments where you think, oh my God, things are really changing. She is sincere in saying that what is the issue? In previous generation, Margaret, it was an issue, right?
Yes. And so we're every generation keeps stuck also in its own belief systems, right? And it's in its limited beliefs. That's why I also indeed think that it's always time to refresh political layers, indeed the journalists, so that there's always space for the new generations to merge into it. The doors should
and check facts. Think about it. Is this, first of all, as I said, check your sources. So if it's a legitimate source, you can assume that most of the stuff you're reading or seeing is correct. But first check the facts, and then the two steps back. Is this the whole story? This may be true. A great example is, for example, here in Holland with crime. There's a pretty worrisome development with young kids, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, carrying knives and stabbing other people. And it's always big in the news, and rightfully so. We journalists should report on young kids, stabbing each other. At the same time, if you look at the numbers, yes, this happens. And the number of, stabbing incidents is increasing. That's right. That's correct. But if you look at the broader picture, youth crime has been going down for years dramatically, really, steeply down. So it's a two-sided story. Yes, there's an increase in stabbing, and yes, there's a huge decline in youth criminality. But the first part is reported widely. The second part of the story, the decline, is rarely reported. If I go out here and ask people in the street, is youth crime rising or declining? You know the answer, right? It's rising. No, it's declining. Really? Yes, really. Check your sources.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good. Thank you very much, because I think that's what we need to hear. checking our sources. We need to create the time in our lives and make the commitment to ourselves to also really do this, because it's easy, right, to consume quickly the headlines and okay, you're fed with news that's basically the F grade instead of the A that's going on. So thank you very much. I think you explained it really well, and I know your books, because you have written so many. Are they all translated?
No, unfortunately, no. I tried. I didn't. If somebody can help me with translating at least the optimism book would be great. But so far it's a pretty tough market. But I don't know.
Because
as always, I keep hope alive. So.
Yeah. No, well, maybe you never know. Maybe there's someone out there, because the optimism book is fantastic. It's such an important message in a world that's, well, we know needs these messages of hope from people like you. And I'm again extremely pleased that you wanted to come on the show to share your truth and your message. And I'm sure that the audience have some great takeouts. So
thank you. Pleasure to be here. Keep hope alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.